Hello and welcome to our webinar today on MSP's Guide to NIST Compliance. Hi, my name is Steve Rutkovitz. I'm the CEO at Choice Cybersecurity, and I was an MSP for about 21 years. I managed the MSP, started from scratch, built it to about 40 people, about 300 customers. A lot of my clients were medical and financial, and they were in highly regulated industries. And what I was realizing was, when it came to security and compliance, people were just kind of winging it. So we built a repeatable process around it called assess, address, and maintain. And now we're able to really understand a customer's risk and then address it and then maintain on an ongoing basis. So we want to help you as an MSP, help you build your business and move it from security 1.0 to security 2.0 and help you drive new compliance services as well. There's a huge opportunity. It's an exploding growth industry, and we want to help you do that. So Choice Cybersecurity, about a year and a half ago, I sold the managed services business just to spin off a pure play security and compliance company. Today, all we do is work with MSPs like you to help them partner and build their managed services business. So the first thing we have is the expertise. We've done hundreds of risk assessments. We work with lots of companies, lots of MSPs, helping them add value around security and compliance to their business. We have a ton of experience and just great tools behind us. The second is we have the three-step process: assess, address, and maintain, which is a repeatable process. We have a worldwide service mark on it, and it just works. Number three is we have a suite of products and services. We're constantly doing new R&D, and we're constantly bringing in and perfecting our suite of security products and services that we've already vetted, spent hundreds of hours vetting, that you could just roll out to customers. We've done the hard work and the heavy lifting. You can just start rolling it out to your customers and start making money. And the most important thing, which every MSP's favorite, is we've built a whole suite of managed recurring revenue services that most of you aren't even offering today. But once you learn how to provide our service, the assess, address, and maintain, you can start building out monthly recurring revenue services on top of your managed services. So we rule of thumbs about 40%. So if you're charging now about $3,000 for a managed services contract, we can increase it by about 40% or $1,200 a month on top of that, building around security and/or compliance services. So sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but the rule of thumb is about 40% add-on across the board. So today we want to really focus on compliance, and the compliance we want to focus on today is NIST, but I want to talk about some other compliances out there and best practices. So we're seeing a huge uptick in requests for companies to have some type of security framework in place, whether it's a compliance or just a best practice. And the reason is everybody on the supply chain wants their companies are doing business with to be secure. So HIPAA, ISO internationally is getting really big. As you know, PCI, people are taking credit cards, GLBA around finance, FINRA, FFIEC, and the biggest one right now is GDPR, which is coming out of Europe, which U.S. companies that have sensitive European data actually have to have a GDPR compliance. The NIST is the fastest growing, we'll talk about that today, compliance in the U.S., and really, the government wants every company out there to have a NIST framework in place. So you as an MSP, once you understand how the frameworks work, once you understand how to actually have the talk and how to approach customers, you have a huge opportunity, because the small to medium-sized business, probably less than 5% of the companies right now have a framework in place. So again, our proven process, the assess, address, and maintain, we really put a lot of emphasis on that risk assessment, because the risk assessment is key in really understanding what a company's risk is. If you don't have a risk assessment and really understand a company's risk, it's very difficult to put the right layers of security in place to address it or manage it long-term, maintain. So that's what I'm going to show you today, how to actually perform these risk assessments. So when you talk to a customer about compliance and best practices, we usually try to start off and try to understand. Now, 50 out of 50 states right now have state PII laws, and they're pretty strict. Most of the states have the Attorney General that actually manages the sensitive or privacy data breaches, and most, if not all, the states have have fines. All of them have breach notifications. So if somebody has a breach and it's state related, it's going to be a huge nuisance and a headache and very costly to a company. Supply chain, more and more companies are asking their vendors to have a security posture in place. And, we get a lot of these requests on a daily basis just for a company to do business with another company. Not necessarily a compliance has to be in place, but they have to put some kind of best practices in place. And then you have your compliances. Compliances are my favorite, and because they usually have something specific that has to be done, and usually a time frame it has to be done, and then it makes a customer move forward because they have to do it in order to either get or maintain business. So what's at risk? When we talk about risk, I mean, really understanding risk. A business has risk. And when you can talk to a customer about their confidential data, if it's some kind of hack or a breach, they're going to ruin their company brand, their reputation, they can get fines. I mean, when you really have a conversation with a customer, you really can get them really worried about kind of the breaches and risks. You hear about it every day. And I can tell you, when I talk risk with customers, they'll talk about risk all the time. Not just IT risk, but all kinds of risk. People don't like risk. They talk about risk, and we want to help customers mitigate risk. So the compliance that we want to talk about is FISMA. FISMA was actually generated by the U.S. government, and it started off by having any and all government agencies had to have a FISMA compliance in place. And now they're actually asking any company that does any type of government work to have a FISMA compliance or FISMA controls in place. Now, FISMA doesn't actually have a control set. What they recommend is something called NIST, right? So that's the NIST control framework, which is developed by the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, which is a department of the U.S. Commerce Department. It is right now the fastest growing U.S. framework there is. So it started off as a framework, and it's now becoming compliance as well. So sometimes people have to have a NIST compliance in place, certain ones, and sometimes they're just requested to have a NIST framework. Now, some customers don't have any requests, right? It could be a law firm or it could be an accounting firm. It doesn't have a federal compliance. It's good to recommend to have a NIST framework in place just because we know that by having that control process in place, we're going to be able to mitigate the risk. And a lot of companies are just putting the best practice in just with an MSP's recommendation. So let's tell you about how fast that the NIST framework's growing. It's growing at a very fast clip. So just a few years ago, very few companies had a NIST framework in place. 2015, about 30% of the companies in the United States had a NIST framework in place, and Gartner is projecting that 50% of all companies in the U.S. by 2020, which is just less than 2 years from now, 50% of a NIST framework in place. So as an MSP, it's a pretty big opportunity to start having conversations with your customer around implementing a NIST framework, and then all the different services that can be built around helping your customers reach and maintain a NIST framework. So who needs a NIST? A NIST is every government contractor. We're doing a lot of DoD work, so government contractors, manufacturers that make parts for like weapon systems or aircrafts or airplanes, and there's tens of thousands of these companies have to have a NIST framework in place and have to prove that they have this in place in order to get a contract to maintain business. So if you have clients that are government contractors, you want to actually call them tomorrow and have a conversation with them to help them become NIST compliant. Lots of opportunities around it. Nonprofits. If you go online and look for nonprofits and cybersecurity, it'll say nonprofits should have a NIST framework in place. State and local governments, they're all rolling out the NIST framework as well. And lots of businesses. And really what the government's asking for is every business out there to have some kind of NIST control framework, at least some of the controls in place to help them prevent against a breach or an attack. So when you're looking at the NIST risk assessment, the first thing to do is really understand what the gaps are, right? So everything's based on controls, and NIST has different frameworks, but you really want to focus on those controls. But in order to understand how to get a framework in place, you first have to build a baseline. You got to know what you have in place and what you don't have in place. That way you can put a plan together to see what your vulnerabilities are, to see what's missing, and then put a plan in place to actually address and mitigate them. So let's take a little deeper look at the NIST structure framework. So the NIST 853 has been kind of the flagship NIST, and there's three different levels really. There's a low, medium, and high. The most common one we do is the medium, and it's about 200 and some controls. And it's a pretty daunting task to go through 200 and some controls and make sure you have all those in place to be NIST 853 compliant. But I can tell you, if you're a company, you got these NIST controls in place, and you're following this framework, boy, you're really going to mitigate your risk, because you're going to have good password policies, you'll have encryption, you'll have an incident response, you'll have a disaster recovery. You're going to have a really good security posture in place to really manage and mitigate your risk. The NIST 171 is CUI. That's classified uncontrolled information. So the CUI data is really what the DoD contractors have to have in place. So that's the NIST 171. It's a subset of the NIST 500, of the NIST 800-53. It's only about 100 and some controls, and it really does protect the business. This is what DoD contractors have to have. And now the newer one is called the NIST CFS controls. So it's a cybersecurity controls. It's 100 and some controls. It's kind of every business should be rolling this out. So it's kind of a not as robust as the 853, but it's a great best practice framework that your company should be rolling out. And even if you don't get to every single control, I can tell you if you do like 75% of it, your customer's risk is going to get crushed. So these are the three big NIST frameworks you're going to hear more and more about. And when you're having conversations with your customers, you want to either ask them if they have a NIST framework they have to comply with, or recommend one to start the process. I can tell you that the NIST framework, if you can get it implemented to a customer, can create a lot of projects and a lot of recurring revenue. So when you go in to do the NIST risk assessment, we actually have a management portal that we can help you brand and help you roll out. It's a NIST framework. We have all different frameworks in there, but today we're talking about NIST. And you'll just go through it like a TurboTax. And when you go through it, we go through it with your customer. We do a lot of the risk assessments and partner with you, or you can do your own risk assessments over time. But we'll go through each one of the questions, and you'll decide whether you're compliant or not compliant, right? We'll see if they have a policy in place, or do they actually have an incident response. So we'll just keep prompting you like a TurboTax to do these questions. So in this case, there's 42 that are compliant, 128 things that aren't compliant. There's 13 that are not applicable. They may not have remote access or remote users, so it's just not applicable, right? So if it talks about remote access and you don't have any remote users, you may just click in not applicable. And there might be some work in process, things you're working on, a new policy or whatever, that'll be done soon, but it's a work in process. So once you go through this process, or we go through the process with your client, then we can detail out what's compliant and what's not compliant, and we can focus a plan on helping them remediate those 128 controls that are not compliant. So once we go through and get the gap analysis of the controls, then we want to actually run the scans. So the scans tell us a lot about a system. One of the big things I get calls all the time that somebody got hacked and they say, I just had a risk assessment, or I had a penetration test or whatever. I can tell you very few companies, if any that I know of, are doing a complete risk assessment for a customer. And things are changing at such a fast clip that if you don't do a comprehensive risk assessment, look at a customer's total risk, you're really doing them a disservice, because you've got to look at their total risk in order to understand what the vulnerabilities are. So the first thing we run is an active scan. The active scan looks at it the way the hackers look at it. It's an automated pen test, internally and externally. Very few MSPs right now are offering active scans. We have a very good active scanning tool that can be run for diagnostics for baseline, and also you can build a whole managed services business out of it. The passive scan, things like Network Detective, most MSPs I talk to have that running, and we can pull some really good information around Active Directory, orphan servers, orphan PCs, old users, old passwords, password strength, kind of a snapshot in time. It's really an engineer's tool to get a snapshot of where we're at right now, but doesn't do a great job of keeping up over time. The PII data, that's your personally identifiable information. Most companies I talk to, when I say what's your retention policy, they say, well, it's 7 years, but guess what? We never delete anything. So what's happening is the risk is in the data. If a company gets hacked or your clients get hacked, I mean, it's just a lot of sensitive data. Remember, most of the breaches are based on the number of records. So we got to make sure that we don't have a lot of sensitive data sitting in our client systems, because that's potential colossal damage or a breach. So we want to understand the PII. The dark web, well, what's been stolen? Is your CEO client's password sitting out on the dark web? I don't know. We can do a search though. So we can kind of go into a dark web and kind of get an understanding of a customer's risk. Then we also can scan the data now. We can see what's been duplicated, right? So if there's dupes, or if data hasn't been touched in more than 3 years, well, we know we probably can archive it and put it in a separate silo. So the more information we can get and the deeper we can do these scans, the better we'll be able to reveal a customer's risk. And if you understand the risk at a very clear, like an MRI level, then the better you can address and maintain it down the road. So here's an example of a PII scan. This is actually from an accounting firm that we scanned one server, and they had 150,000 credit cards on here. So we also had some date of births, and they had some driver's license. But what really raised the flag was, why do they have 150,000 credit cards on here? So, I mean, it's a $51 million liability. It's a huge risk. So the way they get this is from the Ponemon Institute. They calculate the number of records by how much a breach record's worth if it gets breached, and they calculate this number. Customer said to us, well, guess what? We don't take credit cards, so it's a bad number. So I'm back to the developer, and I said, hey, developer, I said, you know, the customer doesn't take any credit cards. How can it be 100,000 credit cards? He says, I don't know, but my scans are right. Go figure it out. So we went back, and we spent almost an hour asking questions. And then one of the techs had this eureka moment. He said, and you collect what kind of files from your clients again? And so we actually collect all the QuickBook files from our clients on a quarterly basis, and we do a lot of the results, and we analyze the client's QuickBook files. And lo and behold, they've been doing this for a number of years, and they now have their client's risk. I had no idea they had it. So we're seeing in accounting firms, they have just a huge amount of risk, not even know that they're accumulating this. And we see this in lots of different industries. Most customers have no idea what's inside their data and what their potential liability is. It's up to us to reveal that risk. Now here's an example of an active scan. So most companies, MSPs I work with, do not have this tool. To get into this business, it costs, well, actually the company that we have a compliance portal with that integrated all this spent over $1 million in development. It's very, very expensive to get into this, into the active scans. But we're able to produce these active scans for you at just a couple of hours per scan. And, so we have it all MSP friendly now, but in order for each MSP to invest in it, it's very, very expensive. So what it's showing you here is that this scan does an IP scan. So what we're seeing is with the Internet of Things and copiers and WAPs, people are plugging more and more things in a network. And the MSP is supposed to be watching all this, but I got to tell you, it's almost impossible to watch it all. So you need good tools. This scanner goes out by IP. So Network Detective goes out by Active Directory, finding the servers and workstations. The active scanner goes out by IP and looks for every single device on the discovery. Copiers, printers, it'll pick up the thermostats. Anything that's an IP address, it picks up. Once you get your discovery, then you can run your vulnerability internal and external scan. Now in this report, it's showing you that there's 225 remediations on 12 devices And if you do that, you'll reduce your risk by 99.6%. Then it shows you exactly how to remediate it. Now, this is a big challenge. When we get reports like some of these passive scans, you might get 21 scans and have to read them for 3 hours to pull out the top 10 things. It doesn't let us know what the top remediations are, where the active scan is a much more robust scanner, and it'll show us the top scans, and if we fix those remediations, how much will reduce our risk by. So you as an MSP could run these scans, then give them right to your help desk and say, hey guys, just go through 1 through 20 and check them off when they're done, or we can do a rescan and do a comparison report. But it's very easy to manage for an MSP because it lays it out there of exactly what the fixes are that need to be done. In addition, the active scan can scan against controls and compliance. So passive scans aren't used for compliance. Active scans can scan for compliance. So once you do your baseline scan, you can see what controls are out of compliance. Like in the NIST, we can see what controls are deficient. On an ongoing basis, if controls are getting out of compliance or changing, we can manage so we can do continuous compliance. Very, very good tool, saves a whole lot of time and great for the customer. And here what I'm showing you here is a comparison scan. So, when I was an MSP, and we took over a client that was having a lot of problems and we charged them, let's say, $4,000 a month, 6 months go by, everything's running smooth as silk. And they look at me and say, Steve, you know what? Thanks for taking care of things, but how come I'm paying you so much money? Like, what are you doing for that? Why am I paying you so much money? I'm not having problems anymore. I always had a hard time showing them what we're doing behind the scenes. We're monitoring the backup, the firewall, we're patching, and all of a sudden the problems went away, but then they're like, how come I'm paying you so much? Well, when we worked with this company to help us really build out reports, we said, look, we got to be able to be visible. We got to pull the visibility out of our clients' risk, and we got to be able to show them what we're doing and how we're making things better once we understand that risk. So if you notice here, like in the green, these are scans between different dates, and the green is what's been fixed, and we can show a customer over time comparison reports of how we're increasing and improving our security posture. Very, very important to have visibility into the customer. You keep showing them the reports in your quarterly meetings with your customers or semi-annual, however often you meet your customer, and you show them these reports, and they're like, wow, thank you. You're really doing a great job, and I can see my risk is going down. And we want to maintain visibility and show them these comparison reports to show them how their security posture is improving. The third, so we get this, we have a framework in place, then we have our scans. The third piece is, I don't care how many scans you do, you can't get all the information, and you really can't scan for data in motion. Now, there's a product we're working on to be able to scan for data in motion. It's in beta right now, but we still got to ask a lot of questions. So we want to ask the customers, what kind of data they're sending, what kind of data they're receiving. Is it encrypted? Is it unencrypted? We want to get an understanding of their data in motion. And we got to look at the third parties. The third parties is probably the biggest risk these companies have right now. Some companies have a third-party company. It's a development company. It's a database development. They're logging in. Who knows what those guys are doing or where they're logging in from? If their passwords, their systems are protected, they could easily be an onboard. So we got to look at not only your clients, we got to look at your clients' third parties. How about cloud vendors? The data is being moved into the cloud, and I see all the time some companies don't have their ducks in a row, and companies are moving data into the cloud, and they think just because it moves to the cloud, they've got rid of the risk, but in most cases, they've increased their risk because if that's their data that's collected and the cloud vendor gets breached, guess whose problem it is? It's still the customer's problem because they collected and entered the data. So there's all these gray lines that are happening. So when we're doing a risk assessment, we have to understand a customer's total risk, the data at rest, their data in motion, and who their third-party providers are. So once we get our controlled gap analysis, we get the scans completed, and we do the base risk assessment and do the questionnaire and meet with the people and send out surveys, then we're ready to see what controls are missing, what policies are missing, that need to be developed. We understand the data workflow, not the workflow, the data workflow. We have the results of the scans. We can now build a baseline risk assessment, and we can tie it back to a financial risk. And we produce an executive summary. We write up a really nice executive summary that's really a board report. And then we have recommendations that create lots of new projects. The risk assessments and assessments in general are the best project generators around. And most MSPs don't realize it, but that assessment is going to create lots of projects, and it's continuous projects that we can help you build. We're going to help your customers move from security 1.0 to 2.0, help them meet best practices or compliance, and really put them in a good posture going forward and have a very, very low risk of having an attack. And I can tell you, I don't want to say this, but the customers we do the risk assessments for and follow our recommendations seem to have very few problems. I mean, very few problems with security. So one of the big things that I see, which I really want to help MSPs do, is how to understand how to have conversations about risk. When I was an MSP, if you really whittle it down, it's all about increasing efficiency for customers, about keeping the lights on. It's about patching and updating so they don't have any downtime. So the MSP's pitch, the MSP's approach, which sells MSP services, is all about efficiency. And when I talk to MSPs around the globe now, most of them come back to me and say, Steve, you know what? I just keep striking out when it comes to security and compliance. I've tried. And I ask them how they did it. And it always comes back to the same approach as MSP services. And I say, in the back of my head, I understand exactly why you're having so many problems getting pushback. The reason is you're not selling it properly and having the right conversations. You almost have to switch hats or switch gears when you're talking about security and compliance. Companies buy for three reasons. They're either increasing revenue, they're decreasing costs, or they're increasing efficiency. So putting managed services in place is increasing efficiency. It may help them grow their business because they have less downtime, and it may help them reduce their costs. But the big thing they're doing is buying increased efficiency and uptime. When we're selling security, it's all about cost reduction. But the problem is when you're talking about buying risk assessments or security products or whatever, the customer has no idea what they're reducing. How much am I reducing? I don't know. Well, we got to be able to do that risk assessment to tell them what the risk is, and we have to be able to put it in a financial dollars and cents, and then we can have the conversation about the products and services. So like I showed you before, if you show a customer a $51 million liability, would they spend $30,000 to mitigate that risk? And the question is probably yes, or the answer is probably yes. But if you just say it's a cost reduction and spend $30,000 on reducing your risk, a lot of times you get the stiff arm of the pushback. So that's why that risk assessment is the magic bullet that we found. In the risk assessment, you can help the customer build out that NIST or whatever framework, help them understand their risk, and then they will spend the money. It's like any other thing, and sometimes people don't know what their problem is, and it's up to you, the MSP, to help them identify the problems. So very, very important, and hopefully everybody can really zero in on this visual. And I want to spend a little time here because it's really that important. So by understanding this, you want to change your approach and really focus on that risk assessment, because that'll help you gather overwhelming evidence to help have a conversation with your customer about addressing and remediating it. Let's talk about some of the new projects. Now, these are some of the projects we don't always know what customer needs till we do the risk assessment. And people always say to me, well, what do I need to address and how much do I need a budget for maintaining? I say, I really don't know. I mean, each customer is a little bit different. Everybody's ecosystem is a little bit different. And I don't know until I do the risk assessment. But here's some rule of thumbs if you really have to have a number. But I really try not to give away numbers because the risk assessment is so important. I also know that a risk assessment is usually $10,000 or $15,000, and customers will bite off on that just to understand their risk. And once you get that, you then have time to really get the information. Now, when we do the address, there's lots of opportunities, and these opportunities all tie back to the NIST framework. So NIST, and about 15 different checkboxes of those 100 and some controls, talk about auditing and logging. So SIM's a real big way to meet compliance. You have to have change management. You have to be able to see who logged into what when. So the SIM is great for helping companies meet compliance. Encryption, all different types of encryption, email encryption, data encryption, backups being encrypted. Again, lots of questions about encryption in the NIST framework. And if you don't have it in place and you need to get the boxes checked off, you need to help your customers implement it. Policy development. We have a full-time paralegal on staff. We're doing so many policies. And in this framework, it have upward of 20 some policies that have to be put in place. Lots of policy development. We can do it. You can do it. The portal has a lot of templates already built out, but lots of opportunities. Most MSPs I speak to do not have a full set of policies. Most have no policies. Some have some policies, but lots of opportunities there. As we move more to the cloud, the DLP, data leak prevention, is going to become a big business for everybody. And there's more and more companies that can do that. So we want to be able to watch for the data and rest. We have lots of good tools for that. But DLP is going to look for an emotion and be able to either alert or block things that shouldn't go out that could be risk. The file archiving we talked about, huge opportunity because guess what? Nobody deletes any data. And why not, right? They don't want to delete anything. So the file archiving can then, it's very intelligent. You can go in and see files that have been touched in 3 years, by type. You can start understanding that data more. You can understand the risk, and then we can start moving archive data into different silos so it's protected. So we're doing constant R&D on more and more products and services. Awareness training is a must. To meet any of the compliances, especially in this, you have to have awareness training. You have to have it annually. So some of the things that we do with security and compliance are annual, quarterly, not always monthly, but you can bundle it into your monthly price and have it as multiple services. So I try to keep our offerings monthly, even though some of the frequency of the things that we do are not. So here's an example of a report on compliance we did for a NIST, and 25 of the checkboxes were had to do with auditing and logging. So if you show somebody the risk, their NIST deficiencies, right, their gaps, you can show them, you can check off 25 boxes with auditing and logging. Guess what? They're going to buy auditing and logging. And we now check off 25 boxes and they're like, wow. So it's not you saying it, it's the compliance saying to buy it, and it works every time. Awareness training in a NIST, 11 boxes are checked off. Customers are going to say, where do I sign? Let's get everybody trained. Policy development. So of the 200 and some controls in a NIST 853, 150 of them have to do with policy development. So if you show somebody who can check off all these boxes, then they're going to buy policy development. And 32 have to do with some type of encryption. So I'm just showing you a smattering here of when you take customer through a NIST framework. At worst, you're going to be able to put these 4 services in place, probably a lot more, but I'm just giving an example of 4 projects you can easily build. Most common projects we do are next generation firewalls. A lot of times they'll do scans and just it's time for a firewall upgrade. And we can make lots of cases for why. Auditing and logging, file archiving, encryption, awareness training, a lot of cleanup and remediation. So there's a lot of services just showing people what they have and their risk, helping them clean it up on an hourly basis, and then doing rescans to show them the comparison. And then proving compliance or proving that their imposture is getting better. Tons of remediation work and cleanup. Vulnerability remediation, web filtering, mobile device management, policy development. Now remember, in the remediation and cleanup, this is usually outside of your regular patch management or managed services. So, having a conversation with the customer and explaining that what's included and what's not is also very important so you don't have to bleed into your managed services contract. So once we build our projects out, we bring our clients up to acceptable level of risk, we get to everybody's favorite part. That is the recurring revenue and the monthly recurring revenue. And this, if you do your risk assessments right, 99% of the customers buy some type of long tail recurring revenue. And these are just a couple services that we have. Security as a service, we bundle auditing and logging, vulnerability scanning, and training. We bundle a lot of things into one service. We've been very, very successful with it. It's almost like managed services. It's security as a service, and we're bundling multiple services in with different frequencies. We're getting tremendous success with it because customers just want things managed and just want it done. Vulnerability as a service, Those scans, the active scans that we did, can be run on a continuous basis. And sometimes a customer only needs that. We can run that monthly, quarterly, or 6 times a year, and then run those comparison reports we talked about. The fastest growing service we have is compliance as a service. What we're seeing is that customers are getting multiple compliances thrown at them. So we just did a client who had a HIPAA compliance that now needs a NIST and also a GDPR because they're doing work in Europe, and one of their clients asked for a NIST framework to be put in place. So now we got to manage 3 frameworks, and it's going to take a lot of work to do that because it's going to be continuous changes and continuous compliance as service. I really think what I see kind of unfolding, and I'm kind of a visionary, is we have a big opportunity here as compliance as service to add that onto your managed services. Dark web and credential monitoring, a lot of opportunities around once we do the dark web search and we see what credentials are stolen, monitoring them ongoing to be alerted if something gets breached. Public IP addresses, brands we can monitor now for an e-crime, and also like domains and passwords we can monitor for that as well. And then website monitoring. There's a lot of your clients have websites that need to be monitored. Don't forget your websites, especially with GDPR, because now you're collecting sensitive information of European people. You have to be able to notify and be able to monitor that a lot closer. Awareness training and also risk assessments. Risk assessments have to be done at least on an annual basis. So again, as soon as you finish your risk assessment, you put in all your remediations, you put in your monitoring and support, it's almost time to do another risk assessment again. So it's a continuous process. So the key is to bring your clients up to an acceptable level of risk and then maintain that acceptable level of risk so they don't fall backward. Because in the early days, we did risk assessments once a year, and then we always had to start from scratch a year later because a lot of the remediation work wasn't done. So I can tell you from experience, if we do a great job on the risk assessment, we implement, bring up to acceptable level of risk, and then maintain it, even with a little bit of maintaining every month, then annually there's not that much work to do on the annual risk assessment. It's just a few hours to kind of run some scans, check things off, and write up a report. So that's a real value to a customer. You tell them that the beginning is a lot of work, but year 2 and year 3 is a lot less work. And they like that because the expenses will go down over time. So let's just kind of do a rehash. We have a referral partner, we have a reseller partnership, and both programs are great. So we have some MSPs, that say, I only see these security and compliance 6 times a year. Well, it doesn't make sense to gear up for it and train for it and learn how to do it. Just partner with us. We'll do the actual risk assessments. We'll help you create the projects, and you do all the projects and monthly recurring revenue. We have other MSPs that, we say after 5 or so, you can start doing it yourself. You can start doing risk assessments and the address and the maintain. We can brand a lot of the marketing materials, a lot of the services for you. There's no upfront cost either way. And again, we have both programs, a referral reseller program, whatever works better for you. We have some MSPs that can use different programs. So sometimes they may need a risk assessment that is, they need an arm's length or something independent, and we'll actually do the risk assessment from Choice Cybersecurity, but still give them the address and maintain. I could tell you one thing, you do not, and I repeat, do not want an outside company coming in and doing a risk assessment because you will get thrown under the bus. If you bring us in and we see something's wrong, we'll recommend that you fix it. We'll do a rescan, and we'll always make you look good because all we do is work through MSPs. So we actually have a partner program and a webinar special. And when I do a webinar, I always try to get a special to get things going and save MSPs money. So what you can do is we can actually set up the portal for you, the compliance portal. We can brand it for you, put 2-factor authentication on there, load it up with 500 scans. You can get loaded with 500 public IP scans, IP scans, get all the co-branded brochures from Choice Cybersecurity. It takes a while for us to set up all these. You send us your logo, we set them up. We'll give you some live training that show you how to run the scans and how to set things up. There's 6 foundation training modules around the assess, address, and maintain that I personally have developed, and they're great training modules. They get really good feedback. They don't put you to sleep, and they're very, very educational. It teaches the whole process of assess, address, and maintain, the basics of security, the basics of compliance, how to build a recurring revenue stream. So you can get the whole portal and 500 scans for $24.95. It takes about a week for us to set it up once you send us your logo, and we can help you roll that out. So that's a pretty exciting opportunity. Usually we don't do a branded portal for less than $5,100 minimum. So this show special allows you to do it for $24.95. So what are the next steps? The next step is you want to contact us and reach out to us. You want to contact us. We'll discover, how to grow your business. We'll kind of have a little strategy session. We'll get you set up with a referral reseller partnership agreement. You choose one or up to 3 clients, right? Let's talk about 3 clients. And based on those 3 clients, we want to strategize and help you with the go-to-market strategy. Then we present the risk assessment proposals. We can do it together. A lot of times we help them go to meetings. I've even been out to meetings with partners in local geographical areas. We'll just set up a go-to-meeting. We'll help you sell your first couple and make it really easy for you, and we'll sell that risk assessment. With that, that's our webinar today, and I'm open to any questions. Thank you very much for attending today, and looking forward to working with you.